So IPP, I wonder, Lord Chancellor, whether you've read the reports of this committee. My friend Dr. Mullen was, if he doesn't mind me saying, was a dissenting voice in respect of that. But the conclusions, I think, of that report are very powerful. Have you read it, Lord Chancellor?
Yes, no, I have. Sorry, just can I? I'll come on to the IPP. I think it's a very serious issue. Just the final word on the rape stuff. I mean, on top of the fact that the volume of convictions have gone up, I mean, the way you can argue that the CPS should measure the conviction rate a different way, but the standard way, I think we've always had the statistics, is that the conviction rate is the volume of convictions as a proportion of cases brought. And actually, the conviction rate increased to 69% in the last quarter from 68%. So again, I know that there's more to do. The sort of the argument that we haven't made any progress, or the argument that there isn't important work going on, I just don't accept. On IPP, I know the committee's done a lot of work on this, and I'm reviewing the recommendations made by the committee, and I know we've got a deadline, I think the 28th of November, and I am familiar with the report. What I would just say is that we've got the IPP action plan. We don't use IPP centres anymore. It's not something that a Conservative government introduced, but I understand the history. During 2021-22, 46% of all unreleased IPP prisoners considered an oral hearing by the parole board were released. 24% were recommended for a move to open conditions. Less than a third had a negative outcome. So what I would just say is I think we've got a process which, of course, I would want to move more rapidly. But I think rather than relaxing or resentencing, which I think would create very real risk issues, and I think would attract real questions of public confidence, I think the better answer is to try and get those IPP offenders through the process with the support to actually pass it and move to open conditions and then to release. And we are making some progress in that regard.
Well, I would challenge that, Lord Chancellor, and I think the figures are very stark. So, as you said, IPP sentences were abolished in 2012, and there are still 2,926 people imprisoned, including 1,434 that were recalled to custody, having been released. Now, in terms of those, I'm assuming those figures are that you are aware of those. So, if we just take one of those things, that people are in prison because they have been recalled, not because they have committed further offences, or there is any evidence that they pose a threat of harm to the public.
First of all, I mean, I've given you the data about the progress we are making getting through, if you like, the stock of offenders that were sentenced under IPP. We had a review of the probation recall culture. It was published in 2020. I'm sure the committee is familiar with it. In the 12 months to the end of 2021, 34% of IPP recalls were as a result of facing further charges for new offences. But I fear that I'd be in trouble with other members of this committee, in particular Dr. Mullen, if I just said, well, we're going to re-sentence them all or let them all out. And the problem is I'm responsible for what I do. And it's the same with the approach we take to parole. It's the same. And I've got to try and do this in a coherent way and a fair way for sure, but based on the legacy that I've been left. And I don't think it's quite right just to provide some equivalent to an amnesty. I don't think that's right.
I don't think that's the case. That's certainly not what the committee is suggesting. But if we just go further, 608 have been in jail for over a decade beyond their original tariff. Something I think is outrageous, absolutely outrageous. The system would not, the sentencing programme would not have been abolished, it would not have been got rid of unless people saw the intrinsic unfairness within it. And this figure, Lord Chancellor, is, I find, absolutely startling, that 188 people in prisons in England and Wales today are still in a certain thing over 10 years in prison, having originally received a term of imprisonment for 2 years or less. I find that outrageous, Lord Chancellor.
I wouldn't have voted for it first time around, but I'm left with the legacy of I deal with the world as it is. Not I can't go back. But what I'm saying to you is, I'm very supportive of taking every step I can to increase the number of people that can go through that process, which is ultimately done by the parole board, and to equip them to pass that test. I think that's the right thing to do.
But then, Lord Chancellor, one of the things, and you know this because and I don't doubt your sincerity in terms of the view you're taking, but I think it's important that we air these views, that one of the quite clear, I think you've had an open letter which the committee has received regarding the support for this committee's recommendations from numerous professionals who are involved in the cycle. And I think the overwhelming evidence of this is that we have people in the prison service, in the prison system at this moment in time who are suffering from severe mental health problems as a result of the sentence that has been imposed upon them. And we are essentially keeping people in prison because they have a mental health problem rather than their actual risk to the community.
On that, I am very sympathetic. I mean, if you look at the prison population, particularly the male, although it's to some degree true, we have too many foreign national offenders, we have too many people who are effectively mentally unwell and therefore commit crimes and trip into prison. We have, with the mental health bill, and I know he's familiar with it, we're taking quite a significant series of steps as that comes through parliamentary scrutiny to end prison as a place of safety. I've worked very hard with successive health secretaries on that. We've also got a deadline, I think it's a 28-day deadline, as I recall, for moving people out of prison and into NHS care. I think that's really important. I certainly think, as well as FNOs, there are too many people who are basically inherently mentally unwell, who, because of the changes we've made, I mean, successive governments over decades have tripped up into prison, and I think it's a big issue. But I've got to do this in a responsible way. It's no good me just saying, do you know what, I'll let them all out.
We're not suggesting that.
No, I know, but that's why I'm working with the Health Secretary, and that's why we have the Mental Health Bill, and that's why we are actually doing something on this issue now.
Lord Chancellor, on the basis of that logic, we could have a person in prison for 40 years, having originally got a tariff of 2 years.
That's what Parliament willed. We've obviously repealed the sentences, but you don't repeal them retrospectively. I'm stuck with the legacy of something I didn't vote for, but that is the way our system works.
You say we're stuck with an injustice because it was done in the past?
Look, how would I characterise it? I think we want to make sure we've got the most dangerous people in prison. I think there is a lot of soft science around risk. One of the reasons I'm pursuing the parole reform is because I am not confident we've got that balance right. But of course, there are also people that we want to avoid coming into prison. And I do think it is wrong to continue without taking steps to stop the mentally unwell tripping up into prison. I mean, I think the other one is drugs. Too many people coming into prison, particularly, I think it's something like 1 in 4 in prison have previously had a heroin or an opiate addiction. I mean, if I've got that wrong, then but it is astonishingly high. Yeah. But we've typically just left them on methadone. That's successive governments have done that. I know we're diverting from IPP, but what I'm saying to you is, if we can get those offenders off drugs sustainably through abstinence-based recovery programs, and we're expanding drug recovery wings, we're going to clear out a proportion of prolific reoffenders, and that will allow us to focus on the most dangerous offenders. And I don't disagree that IPP is one of the elements of that. But I think the right thing to do is to get them going through the process in the right way so that they can satisfy the criteria that I've got to satisfy around risk.
The criteria in respect of that, Lord Chancellor, is not being applied correctly. We're having people going back into custody who do not pose a harm to the public. We have people who have got indefinite... I mean, we should all be in a position where, yes, somebody may have committed an offence in the past, but the future that these people are looking forward to is prison for the rest of their days. They've been in there for over a decade. They've got unresolved support, unresolved mental health problems. We, as a committee, received evidence in camera, so from probation officers and from people involved in this process who accepted that when dealing with prisoners such as this, when they are released, there is an overabundance of caution. So conditions are put on the release of an IPP, which it's nearly impossible for them to abide by. And although some of them have committed offences, the vast majority haven't, and they've been brought back into custody, potentially for the rest of their life, on the basis of posing no risk of harm at all to any member of the public. So my final question, Lord Chancellor, is I understand from a public policy perspective what you're saying, but you, as a Lord Chancellor, as the elected politician, as the Lord Chancellor of England and Wales, you have no evidence, I would suggest, none, unless it's provided to you by somebody, about whether any of these 2,926 people pose a risk of harm to the public.
Well, I'm not sure that's. I'm not sure I'd accept that. I mean, I gave you the figure of on recalls, 34% resulted in further charges for new offences, rather than tripping up over onerous licence conditions. I'm happy to look.
I mean, 70 didn't commit an offence. 70% didn't commit an offence.
Well, I understand that, but they would have been picked up on other things. But what I'm saying is that is actually quite high. I think a figure of 34%. But I'm happy to look at the question of licence conditions again. I have looked at this before. I've scrubbed it. I've kicked the tyres, and I do want to get it resolved. But what I am left with a system whereby I will be responsible and held responsible for mistakes that are made in relation to public protection and risk. And so I've got to do this, I believe, in the right way. But I'm happy, James, to keep talking with you about it. You've articulated the challenge with it in a perfectly, I think, fair way.